All right, so here today we're going to talk about typography, and we're going to break this up into a few sections. This particular lecture is going to be about display type. So to get into what display type is, first we really need to think about how we learn to read. And the way we learn to read is first we learn that there are these different letter shapes, and each of those letter shapes make a sound, and then we kind of eventually over time get to understand that those letter shapes themselves can become word shapes, and we then read the word shapes. But this idea of letter shapes is also important for design if we think about it, because letters are just another shape, right? We've got a rounded rectangle here that eventually becomes a P, a square, if we take some items out of it, can become an N, a circle to a C, and a triangle to an A. So those are the letter shapes, but those shapes together, just like you learn in life drawing and other drawing, can be put together to make, in this case, a word shape. And so that's what we usually read. Usually I ask for a volunteer here. In this case, if you want to just kind of pause the next slide for just a second and try to read it. Okay, pause now, and when you're done, come back. So even though it was a little bit difficult, you could probably figure out that what this slide is saying is, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letters be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Part of this quote is untrue, but the main idea is sound. So this is from this kind of wording here is from a meme, and it kind of messes with things a little bit, but overall the idea is we learn letter shapes as we get older. And if those letter shapes fail us, so the reason you could probably read most of this or kind of understand it is because the letter shapes are somewhat similar. There were probably words where you had to kind of stop and decode it, and that's what we want to avoid, and that's what can happen with display text. So getting back to this idea of two types of typography, there is the idea of display text, which is something like this, and then body text, which is something like this. Usually display text can be a little bit harder to decipher because it's only used for smaller bits of information, like a headline or in this case a title, while as body text is usually a little bit more boring and a little bit more standardized, as you can see here with the information about the people who are starring in it, the rating and all that stuff. So you can think of display text or header text or whatever as your title's personality. Okay, think about the voice of the article or the movie or whatever it is. All right, you could think of it as, we use this Western font for howdy, a little bit of this is called Girl Lasso, I believe. You could also look at stuff from a more retro font. So this gives you a 1950s look because this was very popular in 50s advertising. Or this particular font, which is usually, this is called Curls, I believe, with a Z. It is used a lot at scrapbook conventions and stuff like that. This very formal script. And then, of course, we've got Papyrus here for Avatar. Another thing to think about is the spaces between the letters also affect that legibility. And that spacing between each individual letter, not as a whole, but for letter to letter, is called kerning. Right? And if you're working with display text that is in all caps, you'll see that the letter shape in words that are usually all caps is usually very, very square because everything kind of goes up the top of the piece. Whereas what we'd see in normal body text where we have upper and lowercase letters, there's a lot more variation to give us a sense of word shape. Because of that, if you're going to write something in all caps, particularly you want to do this in display text, you wouldn't want to write like instructions or everything in all caps, just small bits of text that people can read. You want to help them because a lot of times the letter shape is going to be different. They're actually going to go back to looking at each letter to sound it out. And by doing that, you can basically separate the spacing between the letters a little bit more when you're doing all caps. That'll help us be able to decipher each letter shape as opposed to the word shape in whole. Another thing that's really important when you're using text, particularly in Illustrator, is expanding it. Your fonts are linked files. So if you were to take something with designed with a font that you downloaded off of the internet and were to show it on another computer that does not have that font on it, you'll get, usually in InDesign and in most Adobe apps, you'll get that kind of famous pink box around it. To avoid that, you can take your letter shapes and actually turn them into actual editable shapes. This is also a way that you can go through and kind of change things around a little bit. The way that you would do that in Illustrator is you just basically go up to, you select your object, you go up to Object, Expand, and then hit OK. And then that takes these letters and makes them each into individual objects that you can actually go through because they do have their little points and stuff like that. You could go through and actually kind of change them a little bit. So that's expanding your text, and that's an important thing to do before you put stuff out to pre-production. Out to production, excuse me. You do want to make sure before you expand your text, it's one of the last things you want to do, particularly after you've checked the copy multiple times, because if you do need to change a letter or wording or anything like that, or something's misspelled, you're going to have to go back and kind of redo the text because this text is no longer editable as text. It is now editable as a shape. Now let's talk about something like pairing our text with an image. So let's say that we've got this logo that someone's created for us called the cat's meow for like a cat cafe. They really like this picture of the cat here. It's actually a drawing that somebody did of their cat, and so they want to keep that. So we're going to start off by looking at that image first. And if we look at these images, once again, we can compare our image, our logo or whatever, and see if we can find a letter shape that is similar to that to kind of get a similarity between that. If we flip the kitty cat over here, you can see that this cat is very similar in shape to the letter E. You've got the kind of three items kind of going out there. So here's a letter E. This is kind of nice, but one of the problems that we have with this is the center little line there with the E is kind of a little bit higher. It's a little bit thin, and particularly if we look at the shape, this shape is a much squarer shape than this one. That one's a lot thinner. So maybe we use something like this, which is a little bit more square in its design. There, the thickness of the letter E to the thickness of the cat's legs is pretty similar, but there's still some differences. So for instance, we've got these little feet and stuff like that. Those are called serifs. We'll learn more about serifs when we talk about the legibility of text in the body text section in our next lecture on text. But suffice it to say, those little feet, those little kind of things that come up, those are called serifs. So I think a serif font is going to be a little bit better because it's a little bit closer to what the cat has with its little ears and stuff like that. The other thing though is this is maybe a little bit sharp, so maybe taking a bit of text that's a little bit more rounded. And so we're using this text right here, which is copperplate. That looks pretty close, so we'll use that. We'll flip our cat back around and then bring in our text. So the name of our text, the cat's meow. Let's shrink the down. There's the cat's meow. All right. Now one of the things we have a problem with is that space between the S. So that's the kerning. So you can go in and individually move that. with this kerning, kind of the default is either the Option or Control on a PC, and then left and right. So you kind of put that in between, and then you can kind of slide it over so it feels a little bit more segmented. All right, so there's the cat's meow. You also want to make sure with logos that they would fit well, big or small. So that works well. We can still get an idea of that. And one of the things that I actually discovered when I was doing this, because I was just kind of making this up using a cat picture that I had, was that this is actually the same font that was used in the 1980s for all the Garfield books. So I actually had created the same font. So Jim Henson and I are very on the same page when it comes to the font pairing. All right. So that is the lecture on display type. Once again, we're thinking about how the personality of the type fits the personality of the album or the poster, the title, or the headline, and how you put those together, and then making sure that it is still readable, even though it's not going to be as easy to decipher as the body text, which is something we really want to focus on, and making sure that that is something that is readable. All right, good luck with your fonts, and I'll talk to you later.